Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. So again, we are dealing with the whole subject of the sabbatical year. And in this case, we were talking about the release of loans. And here we're talking about that whole idea that loans should just go for 6 years and then they have to be forgiven in the seventh year. Okay. So the Torah understands human nature. Let's say that, right? Hishamer lacha, be on guard. Peniyeh davar im levavecha, lest there be something within your hearts, blial, that is wicked, a wicked thought in your hearts, saying, Lemor, thinking, karva shnat, the seventh year is drawing close, shnat hashmita, this year of release, v'ra'a enecha ba'achicha havyon, and so that your eye is wicked against your brother, the destitute person. So it means you're not going to want to help them, essentially, is what it's saying. V'lo titen lo, so that you don't give anything to him. V'kara alecha el Hashem, and he will call out against you to God, v'haya v'chachet, and there you will be awarded a sin. A sin will be awarded to you. So, the kara elecha. So when it says he will call out to you, yachol mitzvah, right? So what exactly the sifrei, this is where Rashi's finding this. It's the the halachic midrash on the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. So he says it's possible that it's a mitzvah. Now, interestingly enough, of course, so often people translate mitzvah as a good deed, and yet we know that the mitzvah has a far deeper and stronger implication as a commandment, a divine commandment. However, there are times, I have to say, when the word mitzvah actually does mean a good deed. And it could mean that right here. In other words, what the Sifra is saying, that it would be a good thing for the destitute people, the destitute person, excuse me, to cry out against you. Talmud Lomar, and for this reason, to dissuade us of such a thought, right? Talmud Lomar, for that reason, Scripture says in another chapter of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, V'lo yikra, that he doesn't cry out. So obviously, and that's again a similar situation where someone isn't helping a poor person, but there the Torah says, "Don't do this lest he cry out." And it says so that he doesn't cry out. So the fact that the Torah is saying he shouldn't cry out, we know that it's not a positive thing for him to cry out. The destitute person should feel that they must cry out. And there will be a sin awarded to you. So he says, no matter what, afilu lo yikra. In other words, even if he doesn't cry out, God will see this on your part as a sin. Imkain, so this obvious question, lama ne'emar v'kara alecha. So in that case, so why does the Torah here put that he should cry against you? So the interpretation is memaher ani liparea. I speed up the process of essentially liparea means to make up for this. In other words, to pay you're going to have to pay the price for having done this, that God will in fact punish you essentially for this. Al yedei hakoreh. In other words, because this person has gotten to a point where they've had to cry out, mimishe no koreh, and it's got so that the accountability is going to come quicker for someone who cries out as opposed to someone who didn't feel that they had to cry out or the need to cry out. So that's why this is the whole issue is mentioned. So some interesting and very specific ideas regarding our relationship to the divine and how tradition and the Torah understands that relationship. So, Naton titen, you shall certainly give to him. The lo yera levavcha, and it should not feel bad in your heart. You shouldn't feel bad about it. B'titcha when you give this to him. Ki biglal hadavar hazeh, because on account of this particular matter, yivarechacha Hashem elokecha, the Lord your God will in fact bless you, b'chol ma'asecha, in all your doings, v'chol mishlach yadecha, and with wherever you send forth your hand. In other words, in all your undertakings, essentially, is what it's saying. And this is something, as you can see, that Deuteronomy is stressing the idea of reward and punishment for the way in which we behave. And the takeaway for me, more than the specifics, because obviously things are much more shaded in reality, is just the whole notion that we are accountable, that what's important to emphasize is that we are, in fact, accountable for our behavior, and we are going to be held accountable both for reward and for punishment. I don't like the term punishment personally. There's a certain vindictive side to it, but in the case of justice, we know that in situations of justice, sometimes one is rewarded and sometimes one is punished. So take that into account, I hope, and we'll try to understand in this way, and more that one is actually accountable for these things. So let's go back to the Rashi on this. Naton titenlo. So we notice the repetition of this word that means to give. So he says, afilu me'apamim, in other words, even 100 times. That is to say that if we help and him once or this person once, we shouldn't see ourselves as having fulfilled our obligation. If we are in a position to help more than once, that's why he simply uses the term 100 times, we should. It's our responsibility to care for the people that are indigent, people who are in desperate straits. And of course, our needs, if you think about it, are in fact ongoing. So this is law. So in other words, you shall give to him. So he says, Beino u'veinecha. So I believe this is between you and him. Right? You shall give. So I'm trying to fully comprehend what he's saying, whether or not he's saying here that when it says to him, it means directly to him, right? And when it says between you and him, it's saying, don't count on an organization to take care of these things. It's something that you need to take care of personally. And I'm thinking that that's probably what it's trying to mean, and not to make these things impersonal. Again, in terms of showing compassion and for this person to experience the compassion that you show him. Ki biglal hadavar, right? He says this on account of this matter. Afilu amarta. So he says the word davar can also refer to word, right? Something like that. And that's how Rashi's going to go. He's going to say, afilu amarta liten. Even if you just said you were going to do that, or even if you intended to give, because we know that the word amar can mean sometimes to think. Atano tells schar amira, you will receive a reward for the fact that you even said this, and so in this case, it's possible that it's meaning out loud. Im schar hamaseh, along with the reward you get for actually giving him the money, saying you're going to do it, it adds another level of reward to that. Ki lo yechdal evyon. So once again, the Torah is mentioning this for the destitute person will not disappear mikerev haaretz, from the midst of the land. Al kein anochi mitzvah lo lemor. And for this reason I command you, saying, Patuach tiftach et yadcha la'achecha. You shall certainly open up your hand to your brother, la'aniycha, to your poor, and to your destitute, who live in the land. So again, this is, sometimes I've been known to say that the subtext of the Torah is doing what doesn't come naturally. And of course, we encounter these situations right down to today. People who are unfortunately reduced to becoming beggars, and to not make them feel more humiliated, and to be generous with people in that situation. That's going on. Let's see where we are. Yes, la'achicha la'aniyecha, right? So to your brother, to the destitute one, la'eza ach, and he says, to which brother? La'ani, to the poor one. So possibly it's trying to say something about how we need to regard people like this, and to see them as our brothers. La'aniyecha, to your poor, the yud, okay. Echad, so aniyecha has one yud. Let's take a look at it. Make sure I have it here. Yes, here's the aniyecha. There's one yud there. Okay. Lashon ani echad hu, aval aniyecha b'shnei yudin shnei aniyim. So Rashi's now giving us a grammatical comment. He's commenting on the grammar. The aniyecha means to your poor person, singular. If there was another yud in there, then it would have to do with poor people. It would be plural, is what he's saying. Okay, that's okay. Going on. Ki yimacher lecha achicha. If your brother is sold to you, ha'ivri, that is your brother, the Hebrew, or ha'ivriya, or the female, the Hebrew woman, the avadcha sheshanim, and he serves you for 6 years, u'shana hashmi'it, and in the 7th year, tishalchenu chofshi me'imach, you shall send him out free from you. You should go free in that 7th year. Rashi. Ki yimacher, right? So lecha is sold. It's a passive voice, and in Tractate Kiddushin they discuss this, page 14. Al yedei acherim. In other words, he is sold to you. In other words, other people are actually doing the selling, right? Shemachruhu beitin. And what's the context? That a beit din, we've talked about this before, that a court sold him b'gnei, right? Okay, Hakatuv Medaber. Scripture is here talking about a situation where the court sold him to pay for the theft he had committed, because he's not able to pay for the theft, etc. So they sell him slavery. But he says it's already mentioned. We've this, back in Exodus chapter 21, Parshat Mishpatim, where it talks about this, Ki tikne eved ivri. Okay, so we've already noted that even though it says you shall, if you purchase a Hebrew slave, the comment there is uvemachruhu beitin, that there too we're talking about a situation where a beit din sold him. Scripture is speaking. Ella, but however, mipnei shnei dvarim nitchadshu kan. But the reason it's being taught here is that there are two new things that are being introduced to this law. Echad, one, shekatuv o ha'ivriya, right? Because it says the male servant or the female servant, of he yatetze b'sheish, right? She also has to be released after 6 years. The lo shemachru beit din, and this isn't talking about a situation where a beit din has sold her. Why? She'ein ha'isha nimkeret b'gnei because the Beth Din does not sell a woman if she wasn't able to pay for the theft she had committed. They do not do that. Shinemar, how do we know this? Shinemar b'gnei vato, because we're taking the Torah very literally, and it says in that context where it talks about the Beth Din celebrating it, it says b'gnei vato in his theft, for his theft. Okay, so that's why it's a man. It says concerning a man that you to sell him for the theft he cannot pay for. It does not apply to a woman. So
what do you do with the women then, or what do you? Yeah,
that's a good question, and let's see here. You know, honestly, I'm not sure. It could be that her husband, if she's a married woman, that she'd have to have her husband would have to take care of it, possibly. I mean, we're really outside at least the scope for me at this point. Or the other possibility is her father. Those would be the two main men who would be responsible for it. But nevertheless, she's not sold if she stole something. So we'd have to, do what we could to restore the theft, but to actually sell her into slavery is not permissible. Okay. So what are we talking about? So why is it talking about a woman here? Okay. Biktana shemachra aviha. We're talking about a situation where there is such poverty in the family where the father will actually sell a minor daughter, a daughter who's a minor, into servitude to be able to take care of it. And of course, the Torah is very clear about how this little girl should be treated, this very young woman should be treated, etc. However, we can say that back there, um, if there's an agreement that the owner, the person he sold it to, wants to marry the girl, he can do that too. So there's the situation there. It's a whole set of laws regarding that situation. Okay, and so what it does teach you here, she'im yatz'u shanim kodem shehevisinam sananim. So what happened was that in the case of a girl who was sold in this situation by her father, if in fact she showed signs of puberty, she had to be set free at the onset of puberty. On the other hand, here, what it's saying here, what's 7 years got to do here? Well, what if she was sold at a very, very young age, and so 6 years passed prior to her onset of puberty? If that is the case, in other words, kodem shevi simanim, before she brought indications, Tate say she should still be allowed to go free. The ein chidush kan, right? The od chidush kan, and a second new element to this law, ta'anik, and it's talking about outfitting the slave when he goes free, that you're to outfit him. And we'll look at that in just a moment now. So let's take a look here. Okay. Ki melchelecha achicha, we are saying that this is one of your brothers sold to you, ha'ivri, the Hebrew, and then it says or ha'ivriya. That's why we were talking about it, etc. Okay, going to 13. The key to shalchenu chofshi me'imach, and when you send him forth free from you, lo tishalchenu rekam, you should not send him off empty-handed, which is really a very interesting and I think progressive law. You shouldn't just send him that way. You should make sure he gets some kind of reward. Ha'anik ta'anik, right? So you should provide him. So that's the next verse. Ha'anik ta'anik, you shall outfit him. Lo metzoncha. So what do you do? What do you give him from? From your flock, umigarnacha, and from your granary, umikvecha, and from your vat. In other words, here it's talking about essentially oil, I believe. Okay. Asher barachacha Hashem Elokecha, which the Lord your God has blessed you. Titen lo, you shall give it to him. He should get rewarded from these various places. So let's take a look at the Rashi. Okay, let's see. Okay, yeah. Okay, back here. Ha'anik ta'anik, right? So you should outfit him. Lashon, uh, Edi, okay, Ade, Begove Umar It Ayin. Okay, so interesting. So Eddie usually, I'm trying to think. For some reason, I missed this when I was preparing for this. Okay, so this word he says, so Eddie is usually something like jewelry, something like that. Gova, uh, hmm, let's have to see. Marit ayin means something you can. So Gova could refer to in value. In other words, like valuable jewelry with a marit ayin, okay, diber, and something that can be actually viewed, something that can be seen. Diber, he speaks of. This verse is referring to that. Shehei, that is to say, Shehei nikar, that you should it should be recognized. Shehet hativotalo, right? People should be able to see that you've done well by him. Veyesh mefarshim, and there are those who interpret lashon hatana al savaro. The hatin means to bear something. So, in other words, this word ha'anek could also refer to a necklace. In other words, that you should give him this necklace, and he should wear it around his neck. And that the idea, of course, again, that he's being rewarded, that people should see it. It should not be a secret. From your flock and from your threshing floor and from your vat. Yachol ein li ela elu bilvad. He says, well, maybe, if we look at this literally, maybe that's where, you have to give him some, maybe a lamb or two or whatever, and you just have to give him from the processed grain and from the oil or possibly wine, okay? But he said, so maybe that's all. That's what you give him from. Talmud loma asher berachacha. So the scripture goes on to say, with which the Lord has blessed you. So it says, Mikol sheberachacha borecha. In other words, from anything which God has blessed you with. And remember, this idea of blessing has to do with plenitude, with having plenty of these things. V'lama ne'emru elu. So that again begs the question, why these specific ones? Ma elu miyuchadim, just as these are unique, okay? Shehem bichlal bracha, because they themselves are involved in being blessed. In other words, they can multiply, you can add to them, they can the crops can certainly you can have greater crops, you can have more olives, etc., etc. Kol shehu bichlal bracha, anything that is generally something that can be blessed. So what would we not give paradot? So we aren't supposed to give this servant that's being released mules, because mules can't procreate. Limdu Rabotenu b'Masechet Kiddushin, and our sages learned this in the tractate Kiddushin, Gzera Shava, using a Gzera Shava. A Gzera Shava is a type of interpretation where there's a unique word in the text of the Torah, and there's the same, and there's another unique word in a different context, and sometimes because the words are identical and they aren't necessary for the meaning of the verse itself, they can be used to learn one legal principle from another legal principle, and that's what they're saying here. In other words, this whole idea of how you to reward the slave. Kama notelo, and they learn there how much the amounts that you're supposed to give, from each and every species. That's what they will learn out. They do learn this out in Masechet Kiddushin, where they deal with this particular topic. So let me just finish the sentence, right? So Okay, it's okay. Anik to Anik, you should definitely outfit him. Mitzoncha from your flock, Mikanacha Mikvecha from your granary and from your vat. Hashem Berachacha Hashem Elokecha Titan Lo, that with which God has blessed you, you shall give to him. And that's where I'm going to stop today. Okay. So, any questions? Any thoughts? See it. Okay. Let's do this. Sorry. Let's see if I can be trying to delete something here. Okay. I'll have to mess with that later. So I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Any comments, any thoughts on what we've done? And it's good to see all of you. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.